Our trade tensions could be easing just for the moment between the world's top two economies, China confirming details of a trade framework with the United States, after Washington said it had reached an agreement with Beijing. The Chinese Commerce Ministry signaling a review and approval of export applications, with the US acting to lift trade measures, but there was no mention of critical minerals, even after Washington said it had reached a deal with Beijing to speed up exports of rare earth. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told Bloomberg China is going to deliver rare earths to the United States, while President Donald Trump said the US had signed a deal with China and possibly India.
We just signed with China yesterday, right? Just signed with China. We have everybody. We're not going to make deals with everybody. Some we're just going to send them a letter, say, thank you very much. You're going to pay 25, 35, 45%. But we're having some great deals. We have one coming up, maybe with India, very big one, where we're going to open up India. In the China deal, we're starting to open up China.
The two sides reached an agreement to implement the Geneva Consensus after 2 days of high-level talks in London this month. But analysts warn of a lack of clarity on the finer details. CNA's Deborah Wong with more on Beijing's latest statement.
China's statement is actually a lot more measured, while China's Commerce Ministry did confirm that, both sides have come to an agreement on details of the framework. They'd actually stopped short at saying that they will be expediting shipments of rare earths to the US specifically. It only said it will strengthen the review and approval of such export applications in accordance with the law. Now, for some context on the controls, these were introduced in April. It does not ban exports. What it does is it requires government approval for each application, for each shipment as well. So it does take some time to be confirmed. Now, analysts are saying that it's quite unlikely that these export controls will be lifted anytime soon, since China is the world's largest provider of rare earths, and it also can be used. It also can use this as leverage in any trade talks, not just with the US. And it does also ensure that China can retain some sufficient supply for its own domestic priorities. So, these controls are not going to be lifted anytime soon. When we look at details of the full framework, it's not immediately clear because we don't know the specifics just yet. Specifically on rare earths, it does show that despite the differences, there is some progress. We're getting a sense that both major powers, they intend to remain civil, they intend to remain diplomatic, because you look at the tone of the statements, it does contrast very vividly, very strikingly with the statements that we saw earlier this year, where there was a whole tit-for-tat approach. As part of the framework, we also do know that US will be removing some of its limits, although it hasn't quite announced the details on that yet. But we do know that aside from the rare earths issue, another sticky point for China really is US export restrictions on semiconductor chips, as well as advanced tech to China. So that's a really key point to look out for any indication of major de-escalation. After all, we are still well within the 90-day tariff pause, and anything can change during this period.
And more on Washington's side of this, Jagruti Dave joins us live from Washington, D.C. Jagruti, we're hearing there from Deborah on a China statement being, in her words, more measured. But how important are these announcements? So we've had Donald Trump himself as well as Howard Lutnick. How significant are their announcements on this easing of tensions between the two sides?
Well, Wei Su, I think you can't really underestimate how important any kind of deal or points of agreement between the United States and China is. Here, as we don't have that much clarity on what exactly this means, as you mentioned, China hasn't specifically said rare earth, but this is a real point of contention here in the United States, the issue of rare earths, and from the United States perspective, that China is not exporting enough of these materials is a real issue that Donald Trump has talked about a lot. And given the seriousness of the tensions between these two superpowers in the wake of the tit-for-tat tariffs instigated by Donald Trump's measures, it's really a big deal that they are talking and that there is some kind of agreement that is being reached. As we've just said, we don't know the exact detail of what this involves. We also don't know whether this is separate to a deal that was announced last month, where there was a suggestion that there would be an exchange of rare earths from China in exchange for the easing of restrictions on Chinese students in the United States at universities and colleges. But really, China controls so much, a vast majority of the rare earth processing. For example, it controls 90% of the production of rare earth magnets, which are used in everything from cars to warplanes. And so obviously, given the recent rise in conflicts in the Middle East and the ongoing conflict with Ukraine, you've got a real sense of how important these materials are, and so how important such a deal, once we know the details of that, or how important such a deal would be.
Jagruti, we also do not have details on any potential deals with that 9th July deadline coming up. If I quote Mr. Trump here, we are not going to make deals with everybody, just some. We're just going to send them a letter to say, thank you very much. Any clarification on those 10 imminent deals, according to the U.S. Commerce Chief?
No real clarification on who those 10 trade partners might be. We have heard of a possibility of India, but again, we don't know what that is. And regarding that July 9th deadline, Wei Su, the White House did say that that wasn't a critical deadline, that it could be extended. Donald Trump uses tariffs like a weapon, like a negotiating weapon. And so, he imposes these tariffs, then he says, I'll give you a 90-day pause until July 9th. And then you hear the White House saying, but that could be extended too. So this is really a strategy. Donald Trump is a real fan of using tariffs as a negotiating tool. Regarding those 10 countries, India, for example, Bloomberg is reporting that Indian officials are going to be holding meetings with officials in Washington over the next 2 weeks to see if they can iron out any sticking points and have any further negotiations that could lead up to a trade deal. Bloomberg's also reporting that Japan's chief negotiator is going to be doing further talks with his counterparts in Washington. The issue of 25% tariffs on cars is a real sticking point for the Japanese. And so I think there are lots of issues to be ironed out here, lots of uncertainties, but clearly the US administration believing that, using tariffs as a weapon to get a better deal for the US is the right approach, with lots of prospects of negotiations coming up with places like the European Union. We've already heard of talks between the US and the UK bearing some fruit, but still, Donald Trump's tariffs are hitting nations hard. UK car sales have dipped as a result of the US's tariffs there. So, real concerns about trying to alleviate the prospect of a trade war.
Thanks. Jagruti reporting live there from Washington, D.C.